Well, I figured we should follow up on the Chris Hedges cancellation. Obviously, we ran a clip the other day. Chris Hedges released a statement saying that he'd been terminated from the Real News Network. We informed everybody that we'd reached out for comment from the Real News Network, and Max Alvarez hadn't gotten it yet, obviously, because we went live like right after we asked him for it. It was all kind of breaking news as we were going through it. As promised, we've come back with a little bit of an update. I've got a response in a Google Doc from Max Alvarez that I will read to everybody. But just to circle back, this is where it all started. I was just informed by Max Alvarez, the editor-in-chief at The Real News, that they will no longer run my show. The reason for the cancellation, said, is that my critiques of Biden, especially for the genocide in Gaza, jeopardizes his nonprofit status. My last show with Dennis Kucinich, who is running as an independent for Congress in Ohio, was removed from the site. So as Gavin and I said, we said this leaves a lot of information to inquire about. The Real News Network has continuously run critiques of the occupation and genocide in Gaza. They did so, even moments after we reacted to this. We went straight to their Twitter page and we were like, well, there's still going on here. There has to be more to the story. Turns out there is. We were confused at first. Gavin and I aren't, we don't work in media professionally, right? We just do this show. We try to be courteous and follow the rules, but it turns out, and I looked into this, this is true. This isn't like Maximillian Alvarez being like a boss or a control artist. That if you're a non-for-profit status, one of the things that will violate that is if you, basically select a candidate and push for or against any candidate specifically. So you could talk about politics writ large, but you have to maintain like some semblance of neutrality in the sense that you can't be like, don't vote for Joe Biden, do vote for Donald Trump, don't vote for RFK Jr., do vote for Jill Stein. It will jeopardize your nonprofit status. So that was something I learned. And Gavin, if you have anything to add, you are free to hop on, and then I'll read the response that we got from Max Alvarez.
Yeah, so I'm definitely excited to get into this response. To be fair and to be clear, I have no experience working in nonprofits. I really don't know the rules and regulations regarding their nonprofit status and how to protect it. So I, tend to believe everything Max Alvarez is saying. I really don't know why he would make any of this up. But yeah, with all that, on the table, let's take a look at what Max gave as the justification for what happened here.
Yeah, absolutely. So you reached out to him. I was like, hey, man, hope this message finds you well. Like, do you have a response? And this was his official response. So I'm just going to read it now. He says, it's a shame because for the past 2 years, and even in our last phone conversation, I and our team have shown Chris Hedges nothing but solidarity, professionalism, support for his work and him as a human being. And it was truly my hope to maintain that. But I won't stand for anyone publicly attacking my honor and integrity or our team and everything we've built. I can't speak to Chris's reasons for grossly misrepresenting our conversation or to the motivations of any outlet that accepted his version of events as undisputed fact without bothering to ask me or the Real News Network about it. But I never said, implied, or indicated that the Real News Network couldn't continue being a production and co-publishing partner of the Chris Hedges Report because I had some issue with Chris's reporting on Gaza, Israel, Julian Assange, etc. That is completely false, and I am glad to see that anybody who knows anything about me, the Real News Network, our team, and our reporting knows that we have covered these issues critically long before Chris, and will continue to do so. I mean, I believe he means there, like before Chris worked at the Real News Network. He says, it's just sad to see that Chris cared so little about the rest of our team and the work we've been doing that he could convince himself that he was somehow the only person at the Real News Network covering these stories, which he was demonstrably not, and that we're somehow moving away from that coverage, which we are not. Just look at our last week of pieces alone and watch what's scheduled to come out this week. I won't respond to all the bad faith rumors and speculation because what actually happened and what I actually said is all out there in the statement I put out on Friday. As anybody who listens to Chris Hedges' interviews and speeches knows, as he told me numerous times, he feels he has a moral duty to say what's in his heart about Biden, Trump, the 2024 election, and how people should vote. And that is the one etched in stone rule for nonprofits. And that consequences of violating it pose severe, even mortal risk to the organization like ours. And I know, Gavin, you said you hadn't looked into this. I did go ahead and independently verify this. That is correct. They would not be able to maintain a nonprofit status if they were, trying to, or if they could be credibly argued that they were trying to influence an election. And I think it's fair to say that a left-wing publication that is always prioritizing working class perspectives and unpopular viewpoints, is probably one of the first that they would scrutinize and try and take away their non-for-profit status. So I would just add that caveat. Then finished by saying, and the Real News Network's own longstanding editorial code of ethics prohibits us from campaigning, lobbying, or advocating for or against candidates for elected office in their professional capacity representing the Real News Network or while using the Real News Network's resources. Chris knows that. Our whole team knows that. I made the same commitment to Chris a long time ago that I've made to all of our journalists. I won't censor them in their journalism. And Chris made it clear that he would need to be free to address how people should vote in the election, and he continued to cover politics in an election year. So there was only one conclusion: Chris needs to be free from the constraints of a nonprofit to say what he needs to say throughout the election season and beyond. That's what I told him. That's what I reiterated in the statement. That's it, plain and simple. Everything else is either rumor or speculation with no ill will whatsoever. I told Chris that we'd have to release the show back to him and would even help him find a new production and co-publishing partner for it. He assured us he would keep the show going and find a new outlet without any problems, and we ended the call amicably. Then hours later, he threw me and the Real News Network under the bus and grossly misrepresented our conversation. Lastly, as I made clear in the statement, I never fired Chris because he was never an employee. All his payment comes from Substack and will continue to. I never canceled the show because it was never a Real News Network production to cancel. That's why all episodes are freely available on his Substack, and the show will continue without us. And I never censored him. In fact, I released the show back to him so he wouldn't feel like he had to censor what he wanted to say, because the show would be co-published on a nonprofit news platform. So that's a lot there to unpack. Gavin, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, there is a lot there. As I said, I know basically nothing at all about what it's like to work for, let alone run a nonprofit news outlet. But I really do struggle to believe that Max Alvarez would be dishonest in his reasons for, I guess, severing connections with Chris Hedges. Chris Hedges' show, the Chris Hedges Report, will continue on his own Substack channel, seemingly disconnected from the Real News Network entirely. I guess I just still really find it weird that Chris Hedges described what went down in the way that he did, because even if he disagrees with Max's decision and the decision of the Real News Network, it just seems inaccurate to say that like the commentary about Gaza, and then later he said about Assange, I believe, had anything to do with it. It seems simply to have to do with the, putting your hand on the political stuff and talking about which candidates are worth voting for, which ones are not worth voting for. So I guess there was a point maybe in that deleted episode with Dennis Kucinich where Chris Hedges explicitly stated that you should not vote for Joe Biden. Does it seem like that's accurate?
He could have told them to vote for Dennis Kucinich. That would also be a violation. Like, I mean, and I can say this, like, not from my own experience, but like Salisa's, I would call her like a real journalist, right? And she's worked for multiple nonprofit, places, and she has to be careful as fuck about what she even tweets, because they will fire your ass for that. And that's at, like, whether it was the Beacon or, they will terminate you for what you say on Twitter if you work at NPR. Like, people will be like, oh, that's censorship. You definitely know that. That's definitely explained to you when you take the job, right? And I also thought it was weird about how Chris Hedges took that as an opportunity to like retweet a bunch of weird Max Blumenthal speculation.
And that was a video about it.
Exactly. And it's just like, dude, what the fuck? It sounds like he's trying really hard to like maintain a reputation as the most censored man on earth. Like, oh, look at me. I'm so persecuted. Look at me. This is what happens, when really it was like, no, you broke a fucking cardinal rule of a nonprofit. And they said, hey man, best of luck to you. We want to help you out. We love your message. But yeah, and that's crazy too. That it's like, and also I don't know if Max wants us to share this or not, but I guess I fucking will, because I don't have a career to look out for. He was like, he said that he was like surprised that like nobody bothered to, like, not very many people bothered to reach out to him and say like, hey, what the fuck happened? And then obviously the implication being like, even this fucking nobody channel, the Vanguard, was like, hey man, if we're gonna talk a bunch of shit, like we should at least ask. Yeah. And Gavin and I, we're cool. We'll always ask. Most people don't fucking respond to you. Max was cool. He did respond to us, gave us that additional statement. But yeah, to me, it just seems like, Chris Hedges has realized that if he's going to, maintain all these audiences, he knows where he has a warm, place to run. And we got a bunch of comments too that was like, you guys were kissing Max Alvarez's fucking ass, blah, blah, blah. I was like, no, we're not. We literally ran a headline that was, speculatively critical of Max Alvarez. We just did our due diligence and said, hey, we're going to fucking follow up on this. We're not just going to be like charlatans for Chris Hedges. I like the work that Chris Hedges has done. I like the work that Max Alvarez has done. I just think it's disappointing to see Chris Hedges go out and behave like this because Real News Network is a legit ass fucking asset to the left. They do great work. I mean, Max Alvarez really prioritizes working class voices on his podcast and his stories. I mean, they covered East Palestine. They cover the student the student protests and the occupation of buildings. They cover it fairly. So bullshit to try and just slander these guys because they're, it made it clear to you that the way that they have run their financial institutions and they fucking should have just locked up. Fuck you. Jimmy's doing paid ad reads. Okay. These guys are doing paid ad reads. Do we make it, is it public for all the people who are supporting, the On Contact? How does he afford that studio? If we now know that he's not getting paid from the Real News Network, that's how in my brain, I assumed he was paying for it. Apparently it's all coming from Substack. Did you guys know that? Was that transparent to you? Okay. So before you go cast a bunch of aspersions about a news network that has everything public, everything documented, right? Like say what you will about the Intercept. They have fucking horrible upper brass and they, I don't think are worth donating to because the way they mismanage money. They still have to make everything, every piece of every dollar they spend, every fucking hire, everything's public. Everything's public. You can see exactly how much Jeremy Scahill makes. You can see how much the head of First Look Media or whatever the fuck makes. You can see how much everybody makes. Akilah Lacey, I'm pretty sure, has a public fucking salary, and she's a regular reporter there. Do you see how transparent that is? They have to cross their T's and dot their I's in a way that you don't have to if you're just like an amorphous, like independent, right? Meanwhile, they're not even fucking independent anymore. Jimmy's not independent. He's selling fucking silver. He's selling athletic greens. He's selling you a bunch of bullshit you don't need to old people. People who think that they need to do it to show love to Jimmy. It's televangelism at this point.
But yeah, this is very weird. Let's take a look at this updated Chris Hedges blog post on his Substack. He had a much shorter version of this up the other day when we were live, but just since I've checked it, it seems to be updated with some more details and a bit of a response to what Max Alvarez has been saying. So let's take a look here and get Chris Hedges, I guess, full side of the story, because previously we just had like 2 sentences to go off of. He says, "Thank you for your support following the cancellation of my show on The Real News. I've received hundreds of messages of support, including 400 on Substack alone since my show was canceled by The Real News. More than 100 of you became paid subscribers. I cannot answer you all individually, but each message, each new subscription means I can go on. I write and broadcast for you. I see myself in you. I refuse to dumb down anything to reach a wider audience. I do not try to be entertaining. I assume, like you, or like me, you love books and the world of ideas, the nuances and complexities that make up the human condition. I assume you care about the truth. I assume you seek to create a world that is just a world where our primary concern is for the vulnerable and the oppressed, a world where exploitation, including of the planet and animals, is a sin. I assume you refuse to march to the cant of the crowd. I assume you're willing to sacrifice. Yeah. Bless you all. There is less and less space for dissent. The courageous students in our university showed us this. There is less and less room to write the truth. I have clashed with institutions before, most notably the New York Times, where I was pushed out for denouncing the invasion of Iraq. And Truthdig, where after I organized a strike of all but 2 of the staff to protest the ousting of Truthdig editor Bob Scheer by the site's wealthy publisher, the strikers were fired. This act of defiance meant a nearly 50% drop in my income. The principal funder of The Real News, T.M. Scruggs, once demanded Bob
This is where it starts to get entirely speculative, by the way, and there's no evidence for this. So it does sound really petty right here. I just want to throw that flag up forever.
Wait, are you saying that it's speculation that T.M. Scruggs once demanded Bob Scheer delete a Scheer Post column?
Oh, no. But he goes on to insinuate that's why he was actually fired.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah, interesting. So he's saying that this T.M. Scruggs guy once demanded Bob Scheer delete from Scheer Post a column that Chris Hedges wrote defending the writer Alice Walker from charges of anti-Semitism. Bob Scheer refused. Scruggs said he would no longer support Scheer Post, of which he was a major donor. His animus towards me, also apparently driven by my critiques of the Democratic Party and my support for third-party candidates, did not go away once RT, where I hosted a show, was shut down. My 6 years of archives were disappeared from YouTube, and I arranged to move to The Real News. Although Max Alvarez at The Real News insists that the reason for canceling the show was that it jeopardized his nonprofit status, I find it hard to believe that Scruggs's hostility towards me did not play a significant factor in his decision. Scruggs, according to Alvarez, has made it clear that if the Real News does anything, in his eyes, that contributes to the election of Donald Trump, he will pull the funding. This is an inverted way of saying support Joe Biden and the Democrats. That such a stance is anathema to journalism is obvious. I did not endorse Dennis Kucinich in the last show I did on the Real News, but he is running for Congress and is critical of the two ruling parties. I did not violate guidelines for nonprofits. Nevertheless, the episode with Kucinich was removed from the site, and immediately afterwards, my program was terminated. So that is kind of weird. If he didn't, he's saying he did not violate the guidelines for nonprofits, at least in this episode, but that's the one that was pulled, and then immediately afterward, his program was terminated. So I don't know, man. This is definitely weird. I'm not quite sure that this, meets the bar for. I don't feel like there's been a specific Chris Hedges quote or a moment from one of his shows that's been pointed to by the Real News as like proof of him violating the guidelines. Do you have one in mind?
But my response to that would be that there's also no proof that that this guy said anything to Max Alvarez, as Chris Hedges is alleging. There's also no proof that what does he say? If you scroll back up to the next paragraphs before the "I did not endorse Dennis Kucinich," he says, according to a significant factor, Scruggs, according to Alvarez, has made it clear that if the Real News does anything in his eyes that contributes to the election of Donald Trump, he'll pull the funding. Like, we don't have evidence of that either. So you're right. It's messy for sure. And it's at this point, it's a he said, she said. I don't know. I think it's strange to pretend that this was like some sort of like effort to persecute Chris Hedges, though, in the sense that like he wasn't getting paid by them. They're basically just choosing not to air the content on the channel anymore, and that there would be no financial consequence to him, and probably a greater financial consequence to the Real News Network, as he's one of their biggest contributors. You know what I mean? And I don't even know if it's fair to call him a contributor, right? So I don't know. I'm skeptical of the whole like Max Blumenthal coming out and tweeting a bunch of shit about amorphous donors when there's no evidence for that. And he doesn't like direct anybody to any evidence of that. Just, oh, trust me, bro. But I hear you. Like, I would like to see specifically somebody come out and say, what was it that, what was the straw that broke the camel's back? And then we could all judge for ourselves. But it's also like yeah.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's a very weird situation. And again, I think that, I have a lot of respect for Chris Hedges, as you guys know. I also have a lot of respect for Max Alvarez. Clearly Max Alvarez is in a tough position as the editor-in-chief of the Real News Network. If there really is this like billionaire sugar daddy who's applying pressure and saying that like, you better not program any content whatsoever that could in any way contribute to the election of Donald Trump, like that is a tough position to be in. And if Max Alvarez did have to make the phone call to Chris Hedges to tell him that they were going to sever connections, I don't think it was out of some authoritarian, censorious instinct on the part of Alvarez. He was probably just doing what he literally had to do to keep the organization afloat, to keep the funding alive for the Real News. So that's definitely a precarious situation. I'm glad that we don't have a billionaire benefactor that we have to rely on here at the
that's Vanguard. The other thing. That's an assumption that's kind of an assumption in Chris Hedges' favor, right? That it is because of that billionaire that's hanging over his head. It could just be that based on the legal judgment of the team that's behind the Real News Network, they looked at however Chris Hedges treated Dennis Kucinich on that podcast, and they were like, this is not going to meet the threshold of neutrality. This is going to meet the threshold of an endorsement, and you might say, oh, well, that's no different than what you see on MSNBC or CNN or Fox News when they have a candidate on that they like. Of course, that's true. But those are not non-for-profit organizations. You're supposed to think about how you have to act on PBS. Those are more like the standards that they're going to be held to. And I just want to circle back to the fact that he doesn't release any evidence that it's this billionaire, powerful guy that's calling the shots. Meanwhile, we found out just the other, 6-8 months ago that Aaron Mate, Max Blumenthal, Jimmy Dore, they were all taking billionaire money anyway. They were all taking and then celebrating it and then mourning the guy when he passed away. So it's not like there's this principled fucking, I'm not going to work for a billionaire. Oh, I'm not going to take any billionaire money. It's just convenient now to be like, oh yeah, see, I knew that was all going to go wrong. It's like, well, then why did you sign up to do this in the first place? If all along I knew this was what was going on. Do you know what I mean? Like in my view, looking at all of this and looking at the way that they've played it, being the Gray Zone guys, Chris Hedges, Jimmy Dore. They haven't released any actual evidence. They've just created a lot of speculation. My honest to God feeling, and I'd be interested to see if you have a different feeling, is that his treatment of Dennis Kucinich on that podcast where he talks about how they've been friends forever, when he talks about how, they've worked hard on X, Y, and Z issues together, when it is like this fawning, very supportive of the campaign, if not a regular endorsement, that you could argue that because of the non-for-profit status, right, that would not and basically to me, from the statement that I read from Max Alvarez, right, to me it seems like he was like, hey man, I don't have a problem with what you're fucking doing, it just can't be on my non-for-profit because I will lose my status if you all but endorse this guy with how you treat him on air, right? And then some fucking asshole can sue my nonprofit and be like, see, this isn't neutral, and that fucks up everything that we're doing over here because you decided to be careless because you just couldn't help yourself but do this one thing, and now you want to act like you're the victim after you just jeopardized all of the jobs, all the good work, all the coverage that's coming out of the Real News Network, and you slandered us like we're just some fucking stooges for a billionaire. And I don't think there's been nearly enough evidence that Maximillian Alvarez would behave like that.
Right. And if he did behave like that at all, it would only be at the direction of this Scruggs guy who's the one funding the whole operation. Again, even if, Max Alvarez did fire or, cancel the show or whatever, it clearly doesn't seem to really quite be his decision, at least in Chris Hedges' opinion. So, yeah, it's interesting. I would wonder if, when they brought on Chris Hedges to do the show, if he was informed of these guidelines, because
Max says he was in his statement. He says all Real News Network employees are informed of this, and that would be consistent with what every reporter that works at a non-for-profit knows. Like if you went downstairs and you asked Elisa, like, "Oh, hey, is this real?" Like you've worked at a non-for-profit, she'll be like, "Oh yeah, this is fucking real."
Yeah, that makes sense. Then I mean, it does kind of seem like that. The only thing I wish the Real News Network had done, I suppose, is actually cite the moment or the quote from Hedges where he actually violated those guidelines, because we can't even look at the Dennis Kucinich episode. It's been deleted. So I don't really know.
It's still up on his Substack though. So I guess we could look into it and then give you guys an update tomorrow.
Yeah, we'll probably do that, because I would be interested if there's actually a specific instance where Chris Hedges kind of crossed that line, or if it was just more about vibes. Like, he's really down on Biden and kind of seems to be telling people not to vote for him based on their morals or principles. I mean, he might have said things like, a real leftist who cares about the Palestinian people would never vote for Joe Biden, something like that, where it's not like a direct command, like, you listener, do not vote for Joe Biden, but the implication is still clear. I imagine it was something like that. But yeah, it's definitely a messy situation. I'm glad we're not a non-for-profit. I'm glad
we're a non-for-profit in the sense that we don't make any money. But that's true. In the eyes of the government, that's true. We do. Anyway, yeah, we'll keep updating you guys. I think it's a shitty situation. I like Chris Hedges, and I think for the most part he has his head screwed on right. I just am disappointed to see him run off to the most like the least trustworthy faction of the online left, and then expect me to believe that his version of events that's steeped with propaganda from these assholes with no receipts is going to have the word of a guy that's literally like I don't know what to tell you guys. My bias is on the table. Objectively, I just trust Max Alvarez more. I just trust him more. I look at all the data that I've seen. I look at all of the data, the wide breadth of content that he's put out. I look at the way that, he's worked with people that, aren't Chris Hedges, and, he's worked with Breaking Points. I've never heard anything bad about the guy. I've never heard anything sus about the guy.
Me neither.
You know what I mean?